The Knights of Ren podcast is brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., your source for Star Wars Destiny singles, sealed product, and more. Check them out at coolstuffinc.com.
Show me again the power of the darkness.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll. D20radio.com.
Rockin' and rollin', down to the beach I'm strolling, but the seagulls poke at my head, not fun. I said, seagulls, stop it now.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Galactic Senate. I am the Chancellor, Agent of Zion, and I've just been given an urgent communique, and I am in the wrong room. This is actually Knights of Ren episode. What episode is it, Sugi?
It's 507.
507. There we go. Take it away, buddy.
Yeah, so welcome everyone to the Knights of Ren episode 507. This week we are going to be deconstructing and talking about a majority of the decks that are in this just evolving, rotating meta. And we are really excited to have Nick. How are you doing with us, man?
Doing good.
And we have two special guests from the Galactic Senate. The Senator, Chancellor, the man of the hour himself, Agent of Zion. How are you?
I'm the man of the hour?
You are a man at the hour.
Okay, I'll take it. I'm doing great.
And one of our favorite voices for commentary on and off stream, Hexen.
Hello, and are we hijacking this show, or what's going on?
I don't get to hijacking. They don't outnumber us, and we've got more personality. We're taking it over.
We are the Senate.
Oh, God.
There we go. It only took us like 8 episodes to work it in, but we got there.
So let's just jump right in. There are a ton of decks that are doing well, that are not only winning, but topping. And there's a significant amount of decks out there that people who are listening may not know how all of them play, how they function, mechanically, what to expect, how to play them, and how to beat them. So we're going to start talking about, deck by deck and just kind of bring as much information as we can to the community so that people know, when they sit down from the table, this is what the deck is supposed to do. Now, I do want to drop a couple pieces of disclaimer information. First of all, this is not like the go-to, if I listen to this episode, I'm going to know how to beat everything in the meta. This is absolutely a starting point. You need to do your research. You absolutely need to get your reps in. Like, the best thing you can possibly do is find a sparring partner, find someone on TTS, find someone on our Discord channel, and just play out the reps so that you can personally experience what these decks do. Like, listening to what the deck does is much, much different than playing against these decks. Also, you absolutely have to account for what is going on in your current meta. Anything that's posted online, be it audio, video, articles, it's based on our perception of what we're playing and what we're seeing. But if your meta has something totally different or something that's countering what we're talking about, you need to take that into account and not just use, us or anyone else as like the god tier, like this is what it is and nothing else. So you have to anticipate what you're going to see in your locals, in your regionals, and especially like worlds. There's your meta, there's my meta, there's, Zion's meta. So these are things like you should absolutely take into account when listening and, just be aware of your surroundings. There is no de facto piece of information that's going to answer every question and solve every problem. But we want to provide, the best information we possibly can with some of the best players and commentators in the world. So we're just going to jump right in, and I'm going to kick it to Taxter and Agent of Zion because you two guys have been doing a lot of collaboration, and I know you brought some of these to the top tables in previous regionals. So we're going to talk about the Hero Vehicles deck and the Yoda Hondo deck, which, speaking of which, Yoda Hondo won both the Perth and the Warsaw regionals across the pond. So if people thought Hondo was dead, like, he's not dead. Like, there are ways to beat him, and we're going to talk about it. But let's talk about the decks because I know you two guys spent a lot of time working on it, figuring it out. So let's talk first of all about Hero Vehicles, since that's kind of the deck to beat right now.
Can I disagree with the premise of the discussion?
Sure.
Vehicles is not the deck to beat. Vehicles just happens to be the most capable of beating any other random deck. And I say that very, very generally. I think the deck to beat, like if you're going to build a deck to combat one other deck in particular, you need to combat one turn kill.
It's Sabine and one turn kill, because Sabine has come back a lot lately too.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
It's not so much Sabine as also it's also you have to be prepared for hyperspace junk and stuff like one turn kill, and then we'll get into the specifics of the kind of things that we'll need to combat those. But
yeah, in a very one sentence kind of selling point, hero vehicles is probably the most flexible of all the decks in how it approaches a meta, especially if it's piloted by a skilled player.
So, I mean, the premise of the hero vehicle deck with the Elite Ayla, Elite Rose, and Ezra is you have a lot more money-making option than vehicle decks used to have before. If you're running tech teams and rally aids or both, that's even more money options. It's really easy to stuff your money into these supports that'll allow you to basically pull out really cheap vehicles, and that's the real premise of the deck is cheap vehicles as well. So there's a lot of 2 and 3 cost vehicles. You can run a 4s, you can run a 5 cost vehicle if you want, but I don't think you really need to anymore, and it allows you to keep the deck costs down and always have money for the 1 cost and maybe 2 cost removal.
Especially the 2 cost removal.
Yeah.
Because Entangle is bonkers.
Entangle is good.
Right
I did not actually play with it most recently, but I'll honestly tell you, I missed it. That card is so nice to have. The fact that it's yellow only is probably the more worrisome part. Easy Pickings obviously is a great card to have in the deck, and any deck that's hero and has yellow. Into the Garbage Chute, I love having 2. Obviously, it's not good against the mill matchup, which is probably one of its, if not biggest, weaknesses. Overall, you just have a good access to removal, and especially multi-die removal with having 3 characters and not really caring about their dice as much.
And you can also, in that deck, because of its money-making options, you can even go so far as to tech in things like Anticipate, Defend. I don't see any meta reason to do so, but you could go for Dive.
If we get to that kind of point, you definitely could go towards this. Dodge or Defend would have won me a few games that I probably lost that I played with it, because if you just get to that stage in a game where they rolled a bunch of melee damage, you can't do anything about it. You lose. So, but the meta is a little
now you can do something.
Meta's a little too all over the place right now to really say you should be putting this in your deck for that removal. You should put it in that. But the removal package is at least a little bit more flexible than other decks. Your Rainbow, for one, is probably the nicest part, and you just have a lot of solid answers.
But that kind of brings us down to a weakness for, as we discussed, some of the better removal cards we have are Entangle and Easy Pickings. And I guess one of the targets that some people sometimes go towards is picking off Ezra, because those are both spot yellow cards, and they're very effective spot yellow cards.
They are, but I mean, what they risk killing Ezra first, if it's not done in round 1, which can be very hard to do unless you're doing it via action cheating, because you can assume that the vehicle player is going to have some form of removal in round 1. If they don't kill it round 1, then you're likely to get so much value out of Rose and her specials that you'll be able to ramp vehicles really fast. If you're playing against it, the average deck probably just wants to take Rose out, especially if you do not drop Tech Team or Rally Aid in the first or second round. Taking Rose out really takes down your team. And if you get Rose dead before the Hawks come onto the table and get their damage removed from them. The modified Hawks have when you play them, you put 2 damage on them, and if you activate it with the damage, you take the indirect damage. So Rose helps make those more playable. And once Rose dies, those are simply, they are your best vehicle. For the bang for the buck and how good their damage sides are, they're just the best thing for 2.
They're absolute monsters, and I didn't think much of them at first, but seeing how downright reliable Rose can be, even with just 1 reroll, they're just terrifying to see across the table, especially round 1.
They were definitely the vehicle for me to try to dig in early on, just planting that in and just ramping it out there. Those 4 damage sides have won me plenty games.
Four damage sides are good, right? Hey, come to find out.
4 big damage sides.
Oh, 4 big damage sides. We'll get into that in a minute.
Oh, no.
While Ayla has the most aggressive dice, and she might have that oppressive special, she only has 1 special side, and it's really not that big of a deal. I mean, Ayla is an aggressive character even in that deck, but I don't think she really can be your first target. I think you have to take down Rose or Ezra first, depending if you need to get around the mitigation or just Rose and her ramping ability for the deck.
Yeah, I'll agree. At her worst, Ayla is dealing 4 damage per turn. If you're running a deck that can't afford to either A, take 4 damage a turn, or B, mitigate 4 damage a turn, then you've got a bad deck. I'm sorry to say that. But Ayla is the least of your concerns when it comes to vehicles. So kill Rose and then kill Ezra. Just take as much flexibility off.
If they use all their yellow stuff before you kill Ezra, before you even kill Rose, you probably can kill Ayla second. It just kind of depends.
That's what's just like so fun about the deck, is it can be somewhat difficult. It's just a very flexible deck.
Yeah, it's flexible in its play and in the way you can build it. In the fact that your characters aren't tied to specific upgrades, because all your damage sides are really coming from your vehicles, means like the characters that you lose don't really matter. They're just health sponges. You have good matchups against stuff like Kylo 2 Talzin. It's just really hard for them to guess anything in your deck. Even if they know what the deck's comprised of, it's still not really that easy. Really, versus any of the 2 character decks, you should have a favorable matchup, except for ones running like hyperspace jump and a lot of action sheet damage, like Sabine.
And that sounds like a nice segue into that
Sabine.
dirty deck.
Scruffy Nerf Herder?
Oh, yeah. Scruffy looking Nerf Herder is a good example of like a tech card you can put in vehicles to help with flexibility of, I know they're going to hyperspace jump me right now. Well, let's just do this, and hopefully I can get away with being able to take the rest of my round instead of being skipped with hyperspace jump.
At this point, I'm not even sure if that card's really more of like a flex pick more than a standard pick in the deck.
Yeah, and actually having played it a little bit, I don't know where it actually belongs in terms of what other removal or other cards that need to stay out of the deck because of it. But Scruffy looking Nerf Herder feels really kind of nice to play when you're in a deck that has a reasonable amount of money at most times, because it's just like Friends in Low Places that cost 1 that doesn't have a spot yellow requirement, but then like it also just has more power because you can hit 2 and 3 cost events, you can hit upgrades, you can hit everything. Like it's a super flexible version of Friends in Low Places that cost 1, and I think that's pretty good.
It's my favorite thing to do after a lightsaber pull.
Yep, that feels good.
But it's also a really good counter to getting out the never tell me the odds. If you know your opponent has it, you can play Scruffy looking Nerf Herder, declare events, and now you get to see what's in their hand, and you get to take an event out. Yeah. And if they're sitting on 3 resources, they've got the RI lock ready to go. Okay, sure. Roll out Sabine. Hit me with running interference. You can't activate characters. All right, Scruffy looking Nerf Herder? Events? Uh-oh. Like, if they don't have it, that's fine. But if they do have it, you just saved yourself somebody dying that turn.
Well, I'm going to piggyback off of what Taxer said. And if you're running vehicles, never tell me the odds is not the threat. You will lose 1 character. That will happen. Sabine does Sabine things. What you really have to be worried about is that hyperspace jump. They've only got, they're going to resolve those range dice when they roll them out. They're going to re-roll. You're going to mitigate. But they have a very finite amount of things that they can do in a turn. Whereas you have, if you're running vehicles, at least 3 times the number of actions that you can take for effect. You need to be able to take those actions. You need to be able to hit that hyperspace jump. And you don't really care past turn 1 about any one individual character. So hit the hyperspace jump instead of never tell me the odds if it comes up. If that's the choice, you hit the hyperspace jump.
And the big thing was, with the never tell me the odds, sure, it's nice to get out of their hand, but the only time it is super relevant is when it's the one that would win them the game. But if it's like round 2 and they spend everything on never tell me the odds, they kill, maybe they get your second character there, but you have 3 vehicles out now in the second round, you can just push for rerolls and actually probably go for a kill, or if not, put Sabine down to a point where she needs to be second chancing or she is dead. And that's where you want to be. You need to put Sabine on the defense when you're playing against a Sabine deck as fast as you can, which mostly involves just don't get hyperspace jumped round 2 if you can help it, or round 3.
It feels weird trying to damage race Sabine. So it's doable. It's just weird. Yoda Hondo is the next deck to talk about for sure. And I don't want to say I'm the foremost authority. I think that the two regional winners in Warsaw and Perth certainly did better than I did just getting top 4. And their decks are much, much better by just a mile. And they're actually pretty well differentiated if you go and look at them on the DB. One of them, the Warsaw winner being ran by Dark Jedi 91, and then the Western Australia, I think that was Perth, was ran by Stranglebat, and they both ran Yoda Hondo. And I'll talk about the Perth one real quick here. Both of them ran 4 speed, which I did not in Portland, but in Perth, he's running Rebel, which is super, super handy.
It's called Rebel.
When it comes, whatever. You know what? You can be that way.
I will.
Just to pick back whatever happens to be useful, and it is running a lot of useful stuff there. They both also ran Vandalize with the Perth winner, having that as a 2 of. And then if you have Rebel, you're doing things like pulling Impulsive back. He ran a Singleton Hyperspace jump. Entangle was legal there, which is amazing. I cannot say how good Entangle is. And he's just bouncing stuff back in hand, whether it's mitigation or even aggression in the Singleton Riposte. It's super handy. And it allows you to also pull back second chances if they go for Yoda first, which I think is the right call.
Yeah.
You can just make Hondo live forever off of that. It's just really good. It's a lot more resilient than the version that Taxter and I ran. It's a lot more effective at grinding out a long game, which is the thing that I was having trouble with. And then in Warsaw, we saw 2 times the double dealing, which generates income, and then also fast hands for that to disrupt, which is super handy as well against almost any deck, just taking away their options. They're much, much better versions of the deck I ran. I'm really excited to see that deck kind of do better and go more places, even though I will never, ever run it again.
Yeah, I don't think I'll run it again, but it definitely is the difference between like having just kind of scrapped it together, tested it very little, versus I'm sure they've gotten a little bit more reps than we did even with it. So it's not hard to done.
I'm sure they did. Anybody who played it more than a day probably got more reps.
Those late night reps and decision making points.
I don't know. Maybe I make my best decisions when I'm tired and angry.
Maybe you make your best placements when you play a deck for a day.
Ah, jeez. You know what? That is kind of a recurring thing, isn't it? But no, it's I guess it's something to continue to contend with. If you don't have a way to stop Hondo from dealing you damage, which is to say you need a reliable source of income in your deck to succeed in general. If Yoda Hondo is going to be in your meta, or you're going to be playing it in top 8, then you need to go back to the drawing board, even if it's something as simple as throwing in Chance Cube and forcing them to vandalize a 0 cost.
Yeah, and that's one that Vehicles doesn't feel as bad against either with Rose. Like, as long as they don't kill Rose really early, you at least have a fairly reliable source of income in that deck. Sabine even has a lot more income now with running stuff like Maz's Vault, so that deck isn't even as and double Ezra dice being able to steal and have the 2 resource sides essentially. So that's the problematic part of it about running anything Hondo in this meta. If there's a lot of Vehicles and Sabine running around, I don't know that it's really going to be able to stand that test.
Well, I think that's where the fast hands from Dark Jedi 91 in Poland comes into play.
Yeah.
If they get battlefield control and they roll out Hondo.
That was being run in a lot of the ones with Poe as well, fast hands. So
yep, super solid. Get that 31% of 2 disrupt, and it just really works over an entire round for your opponent. So that's something to keep in mind and play around. If it means sacrificing 2 damage in one round to protect your resources in the next, that's certainly something to actually go into the thinking tank over.
Give us a quick rundown on what the deck does. Like, if someone wants to pilot, like, what does the deck do? What are good matchups? What are bad matchups? And what are the weaknesses of the deck?
So if you're running Yoda Hondo, your game plan, and you need to know your opponent's game plan if you're playing against against it is they're going to try to be getting cunning down ASAP on Hondo, and they're trying to get really quick damage in with Hondo's special in the first round, maybe the second round, because you paying for it at that point will just ramp them and set your own board development back so far as to make you useless for the rest of the game. So you're going to take that first round damage. Ideally, if you're running Yoda Hondo, they're also going to take an additional 3 damage from cunning, and you're going to build up a couple more resources with Yoda along the way. What that first turn ramp or second turn ramp, if they start paying you, is going to turn into is handcrafted light bows or Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber played onto whoever's not taking damage. Obviously, Obi-Wan's is blue only, so that goes on Yoda. But those are going to go down, and now Yoda's going to start chaining into guaranteed damage off of specials while also shielding his team, and just slow the game down as far as your ability to deal damage is concerned. At that point, whatever ramp that they can get or whatever additional resources they can get is also going to go into the mitigation options, which are almost always going to be taking care of more than one die. In the Poland winner, we see a singleton Anticipate, which is pretty good. Both run easy pickings and entangle, and it looks like they both also run a single hyperspace jump to get away from those big build-up turns. It does a lot, but the core of it, when you're playing against it, to keep in mind is that they have very few dice that actually deal damage past round 2. You're looking at those light bows, you're looking at the Obi-Wan lightsaber. Everything else you can either pay for or mitigate exceedingly easily.
And even if you have like enough character dice to be able, and if you're running Vandalize to be able to hit like their Force Throws or their light bows or their Obi sabers, like that alone can set them back so much if it's like their only damage sides outside of Hondo himself. Or Cunning. Cunning's probably the best single target to be able to hit with your upgrade removal.
Yep. And then just reducing that dex reliability by, I can't even put a number on it, but it's a crap ton. Is you just throw all your damage goes to Yoda. If all your damage goes to Yoda, Hondo's left in the lurch, especially the later and later the game gets where your resources matter less and less. Neither of these decks are running DL44s or anything that does damage on their own other than a light bow. So just burning down Yoda and then just grinding it out with Hondo, never letting yourself be caught without any resources is the way to go.
Put me in a coconut, and they did. And they did. Let me go alive.
All right, so the next deck we're going to talk about that has seen a lot of play in the meta and is my personal favorite and no one should be surprised about this one, but that's the Hero Mill Yoda Raken Partisan deck. So let's just dive into, obviously, we know it's a mill deck, so you're trying to choke out their deck economy, get cards out of hand, get cards out of deck. But this is a much more intricate deck than just mill them and win it. So let's talk a little bit about what the deck does and how you're supposed to do it. So that way, if you sit across from it, you're not caught off guard, because that's how a lot of people, were upset when we were at Miami. They were saying, we sat across from this mill deck. We know it's a mill deck. We know what mill does. And then they played it and they were like, this doesn't do what a regular mill deck does.
It's really defensive. I mean, that's the heart of that deck. It's got a ton of things that shield, and it's got the whole really good removal package of the easy pickings and the into the garbage chutes. And because of like that, those 4 removal cards that are going to be in those decks guaranteed, Yoda Partisan is the person, if you're a damage deck, that you need to be targeting first, because you'll turn off easy pickings straight up, and making them choose to exhaust Riken or Yoda with garbage chute is significantly worse than having to target or to do it to the partisan. And getting a character off the board, period, is your first goal when playing against it. But it's just hard because they have so many shields. They'll run stuff like air superiority to be able to put a shield out every round. They'll get a lot of money from the scrap heat. Whenever they mill, they get to tap the support to gain a resource.
Yeah, scrap heat.
Entrench to be able to gain 5 shields split across your characters. You have Riken's shield sides. You have chance cubes to generate money. Like it's all about basically, like, the character dice don't do a lot. They're there to generate money, generate shields, and the partisan has his mill if you hit the 2 indirect, but that's not even that great. Like, I guess you want like discard sides on the partisan and Yoda, but the idea is keeping shields up to constantly every round be able to consistently get the 2 Recon mill on top of whatever you could get with Yoda. And then the hand discard really coming from 3PO comboing with either Chance Cube or just Recon's die, which also has two sides.
It's absurd, though, especially with Bestman Wingard now. If you go down to a single hand worth of cards left, you're in a really, really tight spot.
Not to mention, it's also running Fall Back, which is generate a lot of money, and any decks that try to build up a huge stockpile of weapons against it, it's going to knock you down to a single weapon. And that can be rough for decks that are, 3-character decks that are trying to run a lot of weapons, like a 5-die villain kind of build is going to have a rough time actually sticking things to the board for more than like a round.
I'm very well practiced playing against Mill. I have got a lot of Mill players in my local meta, and they're very good. They're very capable. I'm still afraid of it. No matter how much practice I get against Mill, I'm still afraid of seeing it in a serious event. It's terrifying in how efficient it is with its resources and with all of its tools.
And it might not have been winning other events since the one it won in Madison in the regional, but like I've still seeded in top 8s, and it's still all over around top tables. It might not make the cut, but like it's there, it's close enough, it's as good as it's ever been right now, so it's definitely something you need to be prepared for.
So I want to talk about the deck's strengths, and we should also talk about the deck's weaknesses, because there are a lot of people who fear the deck, but it's not something that's unbeatable. It's obviously a deck that has its weak points, but the strength of the deck is being able to choke out your opponent's economy, because if you look at a lot of the decks that are available in the meta, they have a very specific flight plan or a game path, and they want to get, an ID9 Seeker Droid out, they want to get a Maul's Lightsaber out, they want to get all these things out on the table. And if you can preemptively strike their deck and pull those cards out of the deck before they get to them, you're in a great place. If they're in your opponent's hand, then you can pull them out with the C-3PO Chance Cube combo, or, if Yoda just happens to roll out. So
you should also be running Nerf Herder in that too.
Yeah, you should be running Nerf Herder. There's a lot of great cards. You can also run Friends in Low, but there's a lot of cards that you can use in conjunction with your dice to get threats out of the hand and to pressure the threats in the deck. So your strength is disrupting your opponent's game plan before it ever happens. Now, if that doesn't happen and your opponent is able to get their big play cards, their upgrades, their supports out onto the table, you are also an extremely defensive deck where you can shield up, you can use Vandalize, you can use Chance Cube with C-3PO to produce massive amounts of, shields, money, discard, disrupt, whatever you need in the instance you need it. So the deck is very flexible. You've got 3 major threats, and there's a lot of problems that they have to deal with. The partisan keeping your easy pickings online and being a prime target for garbage shoot. Yoda is your fixer, so he fixes your dice to whatever you need, plus he's making you money, or he's shielding up your team. Riken is threatening you with massive focus, shields, and the ability to mill your deck. But it also has some pretty hard weaknesses that I'm not happy about, but it is good that the mill deck is not just this god tier 0 level deck, because I don't think that would be fun for the entire community.
Which, thank goodness for that, because it can be a miserable experience to play against, but certain decks that can action cheat out their big dice, and even just like decks that have characters with big damage side space, are fairly effective against mill. So you're looking at decks like Sabine and Bobby Maz, which if they can get going, they can easily take down a partisan like round 2. And then you also have decks which, in my opinion, I think Kylo Talzin, if it can get like a Force Rend out there, it's in a pretty solid spot.
Ooh, that hurts real bad. So like something you have to understand when you're playing the mill deck is you're never killing anything ever for any reason. So your opponent will always have their characters online the entire game. So some of the cards you're bringing to the table to help keep yourself alive a little bit longer is Hyperspace Jump. If your opponent just rolls out just gratuitous damage, you can jump. You can also bring your battlefield into play, because more often than not, you're not going to win the roll. It is possible, but unlikely. So you can use Hyperspace Jump to bring in the War-Torn Streets to pressure hand disruption when you claim. Also, another big play for this deck deck is Fall Back. This is a card that was previously unplayable just because of how expensive it was, but Mill has the capacity to make enough money to just really, really overrun your opponent with enough resources that they can't stop you. And Fall Back costs 4 resources, and it states you pick 1 upgrade, your opponent picks 1 upgrade, and then everything else that wasn't chosen is sent to the discard pile. So you might be looking at saving 1 chance cube. Your opponent is going to be looking at saving hopefully their best upgrade. But if you're playing a big deck like, you know, Sabine or OTK, they're going to be loading up, you know, one of their big characters like Seventh Sister or Sabine with tons of guns, or the sister is going to be looking at a bunch of ID9 Seeker droids and maybe a Maul Saber. You hit them with that Fall Back when they roll out all that damage. Now they only have their 2 character dice and 1 upgrade. And that's a significantly less threatening board state than 2 character dice and 3 upgrade dice. Now, that's not to say like you're going to win the game, but you're definitely going to slow it down to a point that it will be really beneficial to hopefully give you the extra oomph to, you know, push the mill agenda and choke their hand and their deck out. But the other problem is against Sabine, you're kind of feeding her because she wants things in her discard pile to attach to her when she activates. So that's just kind of that really hard matchup where it's very difficult for a mill deck to win against a Sabine deck.
Yeah. And also, War-Torn Streets, as we've seen, can be a double-edged sword in certain scenarios.
Honestly, you don't want it. Even if you win the roll-off, you want to take your opponents to get the starting shields, to get those 2 mil from Riken on the first round so that you can...
Like, even through a jump, you don't even want to bring it in sometimes.
It's really to be brought in to end the game. If you need it to end the game, that's really what it's there for, because it does have a hard time getting those last 2 cards of the hand. It's meant to be like, well, I need a jump, and if it's like they're down to their last hand, then yes, you definitely want it then. Because sometimes that's the only way you can get around getting stuff like Ancient Lightsaber out of their hand, is claiming at the start of a round after it's the last thing they have and then praying you survive.
Of course.
Yeah. And before we move on to the next couple of decks, I absolutely want to keep saying this because I saw 2 people lose in the Miami Regional because they didn't know that if both decks have no cards in hand and no cards in deck, the person who wins the game is the person controlling the battlefield. So, you know, now the more you know, G.I. Joe.
Yeah, the damage-based tiebreaker has nothing to do with mill. That one is specifically for going to time, although it is a misconception.
All right, so the next deck on our list of meta decks is obviously something that we've seen come back from the grave, and that's Sabine X. Now, right now, Sabine Ezra is probably edging out Sabine Yoda, but we're seeing both of them in competitive tournaments. We're seeing both of them top. I believe Sabine Ezra is edging out Sabine Yoda in, you know, regional wins.
In popularity, it is. Yeah. I don't know if it is necessarily performance. It's really hard to say.
So let's go over the history of this deck a little bit, since this is not a new deck, and you know, it came out in Empire at War. It had some pieces that made it strong, but it kind of dropped off because R2P2 was superior to Sabine Ezra, and now it's back. And I want to talk a little bit about like why it's back and what the new cards from Legacies gave to Sabine Ezra, as also what shifted in the meta to allow Sabine Ezra to come back and be viable again.
I mean, you want to know why it's good?
Hidden Blaster is one of those reasons.
Reliability of resources. That is why it's back.
Maz's Vault.
Maz's Vault.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
I was going to say, that deck has always functioned on being around that magic number of 3 resources. Everything it's always wanted to do has had to like revolve around having that much money.
It's perfectly capable with 2 per turn, but if you give it 3 per turn, you're in for a rough day.
Yeah, because cards like Never Tell Me the Odds are on line 2. It's if you get Maz's Vault round 1, round 2, you can Never Tell Me the Odds and just punch in for like 9 damage, especially if you start off with Maz's Vault, Never Tell Me the Odds, and a weapon and a running interference. Then going into round 2, you get the God Hand round 1, and round 2 you can roll in and do 9 damage unmitigated. Right,
but I also think that the meta has shifted to be slow enough, and there's a lot more squishy characters that Sabine can prey on, as opposed to the EAW meta where like R2P2 just had so much sustain, so much reliability, and it could just crush out anything Sabine Ezra tried to do, where now the game has changed from what we used to play.
And there isn't as many shields as we thought. Like, there was a time at the beginning of Legacies, and especially the end of Empire War, where there was just like tons of shields everywhere. And after the Vibro Knife got nerfed, it's like, what are we going to do about these shields? There's some decks that have a decent amount of shields. I mean, Obi Maz generates shields every round, but it's not like you're seeing both characters loaded up with 6 shields total, like all the time. Like shields are there, but they're not ridiculously everywhere.
Yeah, I think
like they used to be.
The Obi example is probably the best, where you're looking at, I don't know, on the top end, 20% of your games, you might have to deal 12 damage in a round. Almost any other matchup, you're looking at only having to do 9 damage in a round to significantly impact your opponent. And that's the critical juncture, whereas in previous metas, you were looking at 11 or 12 at a minimum because of all the shield prevalence and how tanky and resilient every character was.
So let's talk about what the deck is, what the deck does, and so on and so forth.
I mean, it's Sabine. Sabine does Sabine things. You roll her out, deal 3 damage, you win.
It's a big die deck with efficient action cheating and ways to cheat out to get consistent damage.
And ways to prevent your opponent from being able to interact with your damage, even if you don't happen to roll perfectly well, which is where running interference once again comes into play. One of the things that doing it with Yoda gets you that you don't get with Ezra is you get a lot more dice fixing type of stuff between Yoda throwing force speed on Yoda and be able to use his 2 focus or his special side to fix your dice and then keep resolving Sabine's dice. It just gives you can roll out with Sabine if Yoda's sitting there with a force speed special showing, and you're just going to have a good round with Sabine every round pretty much when that happens.
You also get things like Force Illusion to keep her alive in lieu of Second Chance, and then Impersonate works equally as well with Yoda as it does with Ezra.
Well, a little bit better in the sense that he has more health to shovel away into.
Sure.
So a lot of people might think Sabine is just roll, resolve 3s, and that's it. But it's a much more complicated deck than that because it has some very intricate pieces of control that I'm not entirely sure any deck really has outside of this, and that's interacting with both running interference and using your discard pile as an additional resource to fuel Sabine. And that's really unique because a lot of decks right now are playing from their board state, like with their resources, their character dice, and then the cards in their hand. Sabine gets an additional place, like an additional zone to play with and use as, a functional game board placement. And that's her graveyard. So you've got your characters, your dice, your resources, your cards in hand, and then whatever's stuck in your discard pile, she can interact with all of those things. On top of that, she's got running interference so that you can slow your opponent down either with stopping activations of characters, resolving dice, or when you're trying to set up that never tell me the odds play, you get your dice out on the table, then you play on a future action, never tell me the odds, you activate, your running interference, and you say your opponent can't use cards from hand, which means they can't mitigate away your dice. So the lines of play are just really different because in order to mitigate the dice away, you're going to have something out on the field already, such as an honor guard or maybe a suppression field. And if you're not running that, well, then you're just kind of stuck.
Well, you're running Vandalize to kill that running interference is what you got to be doing. Because if you can't interact with those dice, then that's how you're going to lose your games. But Vandalize is also a great option. Or if it really comes down to it and the only things that you'd ever want to Vandalize are 0 cost, you can go with Ren still. But I don't know if we're at that point in the meta because Vandalize is a much more flexible option.
I think Vandalize is definitely the one-stop shop for things like that. It doesn't hurt you in other matchups. It's not as specific as Ren. It gets the job done, and if one resource now saves you 11 damage later, you're going to be happy paying it. Sabine loves decks that rely on one character to function, so any big character, little character deck is going to be prey for Sabine. To a lesser extent, the one-turn kill deck is prey if you can roll well enough. I don't want to keep going back to the luck aspect of it.
I wouldn't say it's just roll well enough. It's also, as long as you don't get blown out on round 1 by the OTK deck, then you're in a much better spot too. But
yeah, while you blow them out, they're both just high ceiling decks.
And Sabine is unique, I guess, along with CAD or Obi-Wan decks running the concentrate force speed type plays where their damage is unrespondable either with forward and axis or the best defense. That's probably your best path if you're expecting a ton of one-turn kill. is to play Sabine or Obi.
Right. But some of the bad matchups for Sabine, obviously, if you're running Sabine Ezra, you're going to cry when you see Kylo 2 because more often than not, he's probably going to get 2 free damage. And that's going straight to Sabine.
Yeah. But I mean, if Kylo 2 doesn't have Vandalize available to it, especially if it's running with Talzin, notably, like if you get running interference locked out, you can still, like, again, Sabine can still go off with Never Tell Me Odds on round 2 with running interference if she has Maz's fault. Like, you can just lose Kylo on round 2, and there's like not much you could do about it if that's how it happens. And that, I mean, that's
have that Force Rend as one of your early Force powers.
Yeah, Force Rend might be the biggest answer for it, but Force Rend still costs 3, which is really it's not great. I mean, if it comes to the long
but if they're
game,
running Maz's Vault, you get 3 and they get 3.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if the game, if you don't get blown out with Kylo if Kylo lives through round 2, you're probably just gonna win. If he gets 3 activations off against Sabine, that's pretty much over because she's going to be on the defensive by that point, if not already dead. But I mean, living isn't always the easiest thing there. You want to probably save most of you probably just want to make sure you have early Force Illusions and Witch Magics to be able to heal you. But yeah, I mean, otherwise it's a pretty good matchup for Kylo compared to the other things that Sabine would have to go against. I know people think that Sabine's really good against vehicles, and I think versus the most of the lifts we've seen out there, it is pretty good because of hyperspace jump. I don't think it's like anything more than like 60-40 in Sabine's favor, and I think when you add scruffy looking nerf herder into your vehicle decks, if you can time that up and actually hit a hyperspace jump, that's enough to basically win you the game from the vehicle side. So it's kind of a give or take how things happen to match up, but vehicles isn't as bad of a matchup versus Sabine as you might think it is if you have the right tools to combat it.
Well, I want to back up for just a second and say I don't actually fear the Kylo 2 matchup that much anymore as Sabine. My Sabine deck with Ezra, not even the Yoda one, which is inherently more capable of dealing with Kylo, but I'm running 8 to 10 gray cards. That's a third of the deck. That significantly decreases the odds of that 2 damage regardless, especially if you play around it and try to keep them in hand, use other cards as options to hit your discard or to be used through re-rolls and what have you. It's not quite as scary as it was 60 days ago.
That's true. But Kylo has his own new tools too.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, Kylo, you could get a lot of mileage with Kylo with stuff like Dark Scheme, being able to pay 1 to look at their next hand, basically, of their draw deck. And you see Never Tell Me the Odds in there. You just get rid of it. And you kind of know what to look for going into their next hand. I mean, I don't know if you can fit that in every Kylo Talzin deck, but it's certainly not like the worst thing to have to combat decks that really rely on big blowout type cards.
That's fair. I've been enjoying playing this deck quite a bit, the Kylo Talzin variant. And that's because I'm just like to be a dirty player who likes very durable decks. And honestly, this deck, what gives it its, I guess, primary strengths is that effectively you're playing a very durable deck with cards like Witch Magic, Rise Agains, and Force Illusions, while also getting a certain amount of consistency with Talzin. As well, of course, with the Holocron package and the consistent focus sides through cards like Dark Council and Crystal Ball. It's not unrealistic to have a solid Force upgrade as well as just having your other character loaded up with consistent dice. And they both bring in good damage to the table. Even if Kylo whiffs, you still have a decent chance, where I've played games where it's just didn't hit Kylo once, because just unfortunate circumstances, because every deck is so mixed now. But when you have the consistency that Talzin brings to shift your dice over and the way to manipulate your own dice, and you can essentially just grind out to a good board state, especially with the force powers that you're running are very control based. So you have the force powers like Force Ren to deal with some cheap upgrades and some just soft supports here and there, or even just to get rid of a Force Illusion to help you secure the kill. Cards like Force Throw, which is very strong in that deck. Having a Force Throw on a Mother Talzin is a terrifying thing to deal with against certain matchups, where it's just sitting there in your face and you don't know what to do about it. Even a single copy of a Force Push, which is just having that soft mitigation, can be very solid, where you're forcing your opponent to spend cards to fix their dice while you're just
not as good against the action cheating decks,
well,
obviously. But it can also help you with like your some of your bad matchups. Like Kylo isn't as good against the vehicle deck, so having a big force throw in there to threaten against some of the larger vehicle sides, like a resistance bomber, is just really nice. And vehicles doesn't really have a lot it can do to mitigate that special outside of the big ones would be really just flank and pin down like your most basic direct removals. And if you get a force throw out early versus like a vehicle deck, it can be very strong. And Obi-Wan's another great one that's really nice to sit across from too.
It's also really fun with force push and force throw because you can flip a die to a blank, flip a die to something big, and then throw it right back in their face.
Those are definitely some of the fun ones. But
that's a little cute for my taste there, Sugi.
I mean, I play cute. I was the playtest partner for Andrew Larcher, who took second place in Miami with Mill, and we were playing a lot of matchups, and I wanted him to do well with Mill because you know how I feel about Mill. And Kylo 2 Talzin was just really fun because you were able to do cute things, and like I said, with Mill decks, your characters don't die. So the only thing I had to be afraid of was a fallback. If he didn't have 4 resources, or I was fairly sure he didn't have the fallback in his hand, you can do a lot of cute things with Talzin with her focus and her ability to soft flip your dice. And you could sit on, double special with, your force push and your force throw. And it's like, oh God, that sucks.
No, that's too cute because easy pickings is a card.
Oh, well, of course, easy pickings is a card. Yes, I'm fully aware of that, but not if the partisan's dead.
But like going back to it, and the deck actually has some pretty strong lines of play to close out a game with cards like Frighten and Unyielding just to finish someone off out of nowhere when they're expecting to be safe, where they see your mixed damage, or even just safe for a little bit. They're like, okay, I can probably buy out another turn, and you just resolve all your damage together in their face.
Well, I will say that the bad matchups for Kylo 2, of course, Rainbow, but any deck running yellow because of that easy pickings. You end up needing to use Talzin in suboptimal ways to not get blown out. And it's the smart thing to do, and it's the right thing to do, but it's also the worst feeling thing in the world to change a
when you roll
die
your 2 and you're
to 1 range damage.
Or flipping Kylo to a 1 melee, and you're just
yeah. But you know what? You got to do it. If that's the deck you're going to run, you just really have to utilize your meta knowledge and your knowledge of the opponent's deck to inform your Kylo ability selections to make up for it, especially against yellow decks.
And that's just it's just a solid mid-range feeling deck, at least the way I play it. You can axe out a character fairly quickly, but it's also durable enough that you can kind of get there into the end game.
One tip I will give is to resolve every resource side you roll. That's really important.
Not if you roll 6 resources.
I don't know. I'd do it for 6.
I mean, give me that
being able to afford your Rise Agains is very nice. Being able to afford everything, because if you're running a very few even cost things, it means you don't have a lot of free things. So yeah, resource sides are very nice. That's why cards like Dark Council and
Crystal Ball
are really nice in the deck. Thank you.
I love to groove and boogie. Yeah.
Great.
Show you some dance moves.
No, I don't want you to.
So the next one is won a few regionals lately, is the Seventh Sister OTK deck. There's been multiple versions of it, kind of spanning from the very end of Pirate War with a rainbow suite, either with Bala or Guavian as the third character aside Seventh Sister and Sienna. But the one that has actually taken regionals down is a newer variant that is with the Night Sister instead of a yellow character. And frankly, that I think it's shown that is probably the better variant of the deck compared to the one that has, it was a high skill deck, but there were ways to play around it, and it could do nasty damage to you in round 3 or 2 or 3, where it could really go off and start destroying its characters and swinging for big damage. But one of the big differences that we've seen with the Night Sister variant is it pushes up that deadline, that turn limit, that time where you could get completely blown out from round 2 to 3 to round 1 or 2. I mean, it's the craziest that you can get super blown out round one if the right draws happen. And it's like the correct draws and decent rolls, not even great rolls to be able to blow out. The big things that differ from the other version is there's, I think, even less removal in the deck to allow for more capitalizing on drawing cards with Trust Your Instincts and Boundless. Boundless was, I think, in it before, but Boundless is still a very key component to that deck. And really the big key difference is still the Night Sister herself. And the Night Sister herself allows you to ping her to reroll either yours or opponent's die. It can help round one, stopping your opponent from blowing your 7th Sister out right at the beginning of the game. It can help from getting that extra bit of damage that you need on the first round to be able to pop off like a smaller character. Or really the big difference is if you can get Maul's Saber out on round one with that deck. If you can get Maul's Saber out one either before you run 7th Sister out or after you've rolled her out and dealt some damage and removed all shields, then overriding it and being able to put it out there and be able to put like another extra 4 damage out on the board. It's just crazy how much damage you can actually put out, even without having to kill your characters.
Well, I think the key sentence to really focus in on is dice maximization, where Maul's Saber, for instance, is dealing a minimum of 4 damage per turn regularly, 6 damage per turn with the 7th Sister reset, and the top end is absolutely ridiculous. And even if you're not doing that, you're getting resources, you're disrupting the opponent's hand, or you're just dealing, the mediocre damage of only 8 damage per turn. That's a bad turn, when 8 damage is a poor turn going into the next round, that's it's absurdity as compared to anything else.
One of the other big changes, I think, was the actual addition of Enrage, which having a second blue character allows you to enrage, say, the Night Sister to get that 3rd resource to be able to play Maul's Saber before you do anything in the round. And if you just have Enrage, if you have Enrage, Maul's Saber, Boundless Ambition, and Leadership in a round, you just have to roll out resources on 1 or 2 of your dice, 1 die to get Leadership off, another one to get Boundless off, and that's like that's the combo. You get a hand like that in round 1, you can just completely dominate. And if you Boundless into a Price of Failure, you can kill off a character and go off another time. If you Boundless into another Boundless, you can go off another time. Like the potential for high end, being able to roll in Maul's Saber like 5 times in the first round of the game is just enough to make the high end absolutely insane. And
in extreme situations, you can even use Aftermath to force those resources into your favor.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the other ones that has been, I don't think it was really being used a whole lot in the Rainbow version, but Probe in a starting hand also just, even in the starting hand or second turn, that the turn that you go off, if you can have Probe out to be able to stop your opponent hitting any of their kind of mitigation cards, that is just absolutely huge. And it's a free card to use. You don't even have to spot a red to use it. It's just great.
It's
very impressive to play against. If you get hit and you lose 2 events in your starting hand the first round of the game too, like it feels like your first round is crippled, and you just have to let them sit there and do what they want. Let alone their dice also have every single one of their 5 starting dice has a disrupt side. So even if you do have mitigation, if your mitigation isn't free, it's very easy for them to roll at least 1 disrupt to be able to stop you from actually being able to do much that round for mitigation. So
yep, you essentially only get your first round to do what you want, and then your second round is spent either completely killing the deck by killing 7th Sister, if you're running a deck capable of doing so, or just trying to survive until the 3rd round.
Which can be killing off one of their side characters to prevent them from resetting it too many times.
Even then, with Maul's Saber out, if that is perfect on the field, it is... Ooh, it's a rough situation to be in. I mean, even if you're only killing 7th Sister, let's say they were really aggressive with the 7th Sister first round, you only need 4 damage to kill her. That's still a really tough call to actually make, because they can just as easily use Sienna for all of those combo enabling cards.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of like reminds me of like some of the blowout level plays you could see in round 1 with FN back in Spirit of Rebellion, and that's that's the like crazy part about it. Is like we have not seen a deck with this high end of an early high end as since Spirit Rebellion and FN. So
I really do think it is the best deck in the format because of that top end. It rewards player skill, which combo decks should reward 100%. I am fully in favor of that. I think it just does too much. I think it's the best deck by a wide margin. And as more people try it out on TTS, as more people build it and acquire those ID9 droid dice, which are the bottleneck for in real life play, it's going to shake out very, very quickly to be just the oppressive thing that we all kind of, I don't know, I want to say anticipate it to be, but in all of my testing, I haven't found any reliable way to beat it that doesn't just auto fold in so many ways to other matchups. It requires such a degree of hand hate and resource disruption as to be unreasonable.
Coercion can be nice.
Yeah, coercion is the one silver bullet that I've found. Apart from that, everything is too situational and too wishy-washy to be used against other decks in the meta. And I'm really afraid of, by the time Worlds rolls around, I'm afraid of the meta rolling around to being a Sabine deck, a one-turn kill deck, and an anti-one-turn kill deck. That's my fear.
I would like to... It would be very nice to see the meta not go into a 2 or 3 deck meta like it was in Spirit Rebellion. But I mean, the way everything is right now and has been with these regionals, it's looking promising. But I mean, we'll see how it goes forward with how these decks remain popular and what answers people come up with to these as they do become more popular too.
My bet is that we're going to see a devolving very, very swiftly. And if not, I'll be happy. I'll be the most thrilled person in the world to see this wide meta continue to exist. But I'm not accustomed to getting what I want, so I'm not holding my breath.
All right, so let's talk about good matchups, bad matchups.
Yeah.
Good matchups. Any 2-character matchup is a good matchup.
Especially, because you can just blow up one of the characters round 2 guaranteed. I feel like if you don't kill one of their characters round 2, you did probably lose the game, but you can do it.
In my testing, and I'm certainly not a great player at the deck. It's not exactly difficult to kill Obi by the middle of round 2. And then throw Maz some damage on top of everything else. Like, if that's our baseline, you know, that's what you have to kind of plan for. 3-character decks are a little more difficult, especially vehicles. Vehicles seems to have the best chances against it because of its high health pool and not caring about any individual character.
And it does have some good mitigation as long as you still have your resources and a fair amount of discard sides on their stuff. There's a few answers to it. And even, again, the scruffy looking Nerf herder is another great card that can help you a lot against that deck. And that I like trying vehicles as well. So like if your deck has ways to withstand big amounts of burst and actually remove multiple dice
into the garbage chute.
Yep, that helps out a lot.
Even an early vandalize can really cripple
yes,
their
and
game
that's the other one. If you can vandalize a Maul Saber, if they play it round 1, you can set them behind significantly. And if that sets you behind 1 resource and several character dice, if you have 5 in like the vehicles deck, you're still probably able to play a vehicle that round and still keep ramping yourself while keeping them down.
And even if they tried to tutor out another one with, say, a lightsaber pool, you still have scruffy looking Nerf herders.
Well, I think vandalizing round 1, if you do that, especially on a Maul Saber, but even if it's only an ID9 or an ancient lightsaber, that's probably your path to victory. That's the window that has opened up for you, and you need to take it.
Because any upgrades they have on them are the key to them ramping out and doing a lot of big damage round 1. Because so you're not going to see Seventh Sister reset herself with no upgrades. That's just the gist of it. And if you are, it's a desperation move because that's the best they got. But the deck does significantly worse if you have no upgrades on it when you're doing the resets.
Agreed.
Don't forget about hyperspace jump and retreat.
Not. I mean, unless you. So it's very hyperspace jump and retreat are capable against people who are not that experienced with the deck. If you have a amateur, for lack of a better word, with the deck, they will walk into those hyperspace jumps and those retreats. Anybody who's very experienced is going to use those ID9 droid dice to discard you or disrupt you, or they're going to use probe to pull cards out of your hand prior to you using hyperspace jump or retreat, and it's not effective. It is not a solution that is viable.
I mean, it's not enough to be able to be like, okay, we're going to stop the combo from coming, because basically they're never going to, a good player with the OTK deck will probably never, unless they have no other options, sack one of their characters with Price of Failure, or even really want a leadership if they know that they're going to get their round cut short. They'll do everything they can between discard and disrupt beforehand until they're at a place where they feel like, well, as long as I know that I'm not going to be completely shut down by the round end, I'll go off here. But it doesn't mean that using hyperspace jump, like as a Sabine deck, if you roll out, do your damage, and then hyperspace jump, that's still a very effective round for Sabine, especially if you're playing on Maz's Vault. That's the kind of situation where it can still be good, not to stop them after they do the reset, but the ability to do decks with a lot of the action sheet and be able to roll out, do your damage, do it again, roll out, do your damage. So it's not bad still. It's just you're not going to get the sneaky play with it.
Come on, man, quit that banging.
Hey, what's that stank?
You put a fish in our basket.
All right, so next deck on the agenda, which has been a pretty talked up pairing since spoilers, has been Obi-Wan Kenobi and Maz. And this deck has, in its inception, has been awkward to build around, and no one has really cracked it until recently, I believe. And mainly that key is due to a little card that I love, and a lot of us blue hero players love, is Concentrate.
All right, Hexen, before you dive deep into it, can I give a quick shout out?
Yes, you may.
All right, Brian M. in the San Diego Regional. I cannot praise his deck enough. He's doing everything you're about to talk about. I really think he has cracked the case on Obi-Wan Maz. I have yet to see a deck list superior with that character combination. It's super good. Just solid deck all the way around. Does everything it can possibly do. Anyway, take it away.
So, Concentrate, and this is a little number from the 2-player starter, which, as we all know, is a home for a lot of fun cards. But the reason why this card is so strong is that, for one, you can just turn any one of your die to any side, and you may spend an additional one. And with just the synergy of all these cards that we have, such as Force Speed and Running Interference, because Obi-Wan's biggest downfall since the inception is as soon as you kill Maz off, you're dealing with a very honest Obi-Wan Kenobi, who honestly can sometimes not even be that terrifying, especially with the amount of rolls that he'd have to go. He still has that ceiling, but consistency is what wins games. And putting in these cards to enable you to just always land to those big damage sides has, I think, really pushed this deck. And in San Diego that we saw, like, his deck was running about 20 plus events, if I have that correct.
21 to be exact.
So not oversaturated on upgrades, even like forsaken taking cards such as like Force Illusion, which, as we know, is a big survival piece, but that's mainly because Obi-Wan Kenobi in himself is a very durable character. Like, all you need is a Shoto on him and another weapon, and he can go to town on most characters and just like kind of hang in there throughout rounds. And the beauty about this deck is the power is in its event package, where it has great control pieces, great ways to fix your own dice, like some ways to like even just gain money with cards like Truce, and even just like funny text like, this was just more of an amusing tech to me, but like a copy of Fair Trade, because at that point in the meta, I believe it was just Hondo was just relevant and fairly popular. It was just coming off Portland, so I just chalked that up more to a meta call.
Yeah, that Singleton Fair Trade could easily be a second lightsaber pull, or even as a nod to one turn kill. That could quite possibly be into the garbage chute, or a scruffy nerf herder. Even it could be like anything you want.
It could be a BB-8 if you're Eric from down in.
Yeah, I don't know about that BB-8, but. It could be something. It could be something.
But even now, with some of the newer updates that we saw, like from Chicago, we saw like the inclusions of running interference.
Yeah, running interference, Mau's Vault, and hyperspace jump, even for the matchups versus vehicle decks, and honestly, like even versus stuff like Kylo Talzin, who your deck might usually be a pretty high blue deck. Like you if you're running all those yellow cards for one, it's a much better against Kylo. But being able to like force speed, roll out, do your damage, and jump. You'll still outpace almost everything outside of Sabine.
Agreed, 100%. It's the second quickest deck in the format, and when you play to that strength, it just opens up a wide array of options, including Maz's Vault, because it can use those resources more effectively than any other deck except, again, Sabine.
And of course, like even in the hands of like very capable pilots, we saw that they would even delay Maz activations to like set up Obi-Wan in a position where you can get like a big blowout, like just to hit that like force speed special first.
You're not doing it. You're not doing it to focus, flip, and do 3 damage. Like you're going for bigger than 3 damage there.
Yeah, every time, 100%, and it's terrifying.
You want to hit that max damage ceiling, and that's why this deck like has legs against certain decks like such as OTK, because like the issue with decks like that is it's a very problematic deck, as we've discussed, but if you are capable of just blowing out Sister like round 2, or just even crippling her like severely in round 1, just puts you in an amazing spot. And this deck is fairly capable of setting up like that.
I'm sorry, are you saying that Sabine is problematic, or that Obi is?
Oh, I was saying one turn kill was.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right, I'll let that stand then.
But this is honestly just like a solid deck. I've been a fan of Obi-Wan. We all were. Like, we saw his die sides, we saw his ability with the back by the 12 health. He can just endure for a very long time.
He always used to, even if you didn't play him with some of this faster stuff. But yeah, the way it is now, I'm impressed with the people that have cracked that, and very interested in seeing him as he goes forward, because that deck's just cool. It's new. It's even though it might be kind of like Sabine, it's not Sabine, so I don't hate it as much.
You just like that it has a paid damage side. That's what you like.
It's just like that one step slower where you're like, I still feel like I'm in my like comfortable play space. I'm not going too ham and running out of things to do.
I think it is, and ultimately, Obi Maz is a fair deck in the sense that it's not doing anything that you can't foresee. It's not pulling damage out of nowhere.
It gives you about one action to react. I get the real, actually, the other real trick that running interference gives you is it does kind of lock you out of even having one action, because the trick with running interference is Vibra Knife, lockout, play cards, activate Obi-Wan. Then you get your action after that. Aside from that, though, like for the most part, you still usually be able to, even if it doesn't show damage, being able to at least remove one of the die before he goes off crazy.
The one tip I can give, every game is different, of course, but maybe removing force speed isn't such a bad idea. Mm-hmm. People were loath to do it for so long, and I agreed with it for so long. Sometimes it was just better to take the damage, whatever that damage was. With Obi, you can't afford to. It's not.
We're of course talking about removing the die. Just get rid of that action efficiency.
Yeah, you can get rid of it with Vandalize. It's also good, or Rend.
Yep. Or alternatively, if you can't, I should say, in lieu of removing force speed, if you have the opportunity to remove an Obi die, much better 2 Obi dice. Do that even if they aren't threatening at the moment.
If you ever get an opportunity to easy pick Obi-Wan's dice, you just do it. That's the right answer.
Who is one of the characters that is just very easy to pick on?
Yeah.
Oh, you made a pun.
Oh, that's why we're here, right? We're punny.
I don't see why not.
Yeah, it kind of stinks that he's got 2 3 sides and 2 shield sides, and it's just, ooh, his dice are like the prime target for that card.
Yeah, well,
Can't tell you the amount of times. The price to pay to be such an honest man.
I don't
Obi-Wan.
mind. It got me a regional win.
As far as like weaknesses for this deck, I mean, sure, I still think killing Mazurus is still like the right thing to do because
Obi's
she's
too
just
tanky
very
still.
easy to take down. Yeah, like if you can knock her out and you can kind of like best case, you kill Maz like start of like round 2. Like worst case, hopefully you get like a sneaky damage in there, like beginning of round 3. But yeah, Maz should still be your primary target because she's a squishy support character that she's still providing cards like easy pickings that you're going to have to deal with at some point.
Yep, but if you have 8 damage round 1 and you have to choose who to apply it to, that's still a hard choice. I can't just say kill Maz.
I mean, that's fair. But if I can take a character off the board, I think I want to take a character off the board.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at 6 damage round 1, then it goes to Maz. But if you're looking at 8+, it goes to Obi. That would be my recommendation, but
it also depends
it
where
may
they put
not
the
be
starting
correct.
shield. Because if a lot of people will put their Obi-Wan shield that they get in that first round on Maz, which will make it even harder to kill her on the round 1.
That's very true. I'd say it has a bad matchup versus One Turn Kill, a bad matchup versus Sabine, and it's ultimately a very fair matchup versus everything else.
Well, I didn't get to play the one guy, but I had great matchups with the vehicle deck versus it. But that was the not scary concentrate version.
My
My
vehicles versus the non-concentrate version should be in the vehicles favor because you just have so much good removal against it. But I don't know. I didn't actually get to play against one with concentrate yet, so it would be interesting. It'd be a lot harder to interact with the dice for sure. But you do have a ton of
terrifying.
dice. So and because of that, they might be running less impactful dice because of it. Like they're not necessarily running. Like I
still think it's terrifying.
I mean, the dice is a little different in the slow version.
It is terrifying. Big character dice are always terrifying.
I did not have an easy matchup in my top 4, which is partially why I keep praising that individual with his deck. It was really solid. It's really good. That concentrate changes an entire game to a level that I cannot overstate because you're locked into removing one or more high impact dice every turn, or you're risking getting absolutely blown out with no ability to respond.
Can you explain that statement? Why, like, what happened with the concentrate that's so impactful?
Yeah, sure. So both Obi dice have a 33% chance of rolling 3 damage. And then when you work in the inevitable upgrades, whether it's an Ancient, whether it's a Shoto, whether it's an Heirloom Lightsaber, or even a Raise, some versions still run Raise Lightsaber, which isn't necessarily the wrong decision. You're looking at a representation of at least 6, if not 8 or 9 damage on the board at any given point. Only one of those dice need to roll well, and all you need to do to give that deck an opening is to say to yourself, you know what? I can take 3 damage. And when you say I can take 3 damage, before you know it, you're taking 9. And your entire game plan falls apart around you, and it's terrible. So when you recognize when you're actually looking at 9 damage versus the 3 damage that just happens to be out there and represented, the better off you'll be. But it does introduce hand constraints. If you can't control Obi dice, if you don't pack the conditional removal or the wide array of removal necessary to work your way around those situations, you're going to find yourself taking 9+ damage in a turn. And it feels terrible. And you're going to do it while they build up shields and defensive options for themselves.
Any last thoughts? Moving on.
I like it. It's cool.
Concentrate for the win.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think it's fair. I think it's a fine baseline deck to exist.
God knows I love that card.
Back your face. Now run, jump. I can be your backpack while you run. Swing from a hairy vine. I can be your backpack while you climb.
So the last deck kind of talking about here today is the Tarkin Seventh Sister, which was, I know, one of the ones that I was most excited to play about at the beginning of Legacies, but my enthusiasm with it died a little bit as other decks popped up, as Kylo got a little bit more popular with locally and stuff, because it runs a lot of blue stuff. But some of the recent innovations with that deck that I've seen, there's several different ways people kind of go for approaching building it, but a lot of the recent stuffs have been going with a lot of more melee weapon heavy, definitely throwing in the Maul Sabers into that deck because of just how ridiculous Saber is. It kind of puts the deck into a place where it's like, if the deck can survive through round 2, if it can keep Seven Sister alive through round 2, then it's in a great spot, and Seven Sister is just going to destroy things while Tarkin just sits there and puts on the extra gravy with his 4 indirect damage around. So a lot of times you're still going to see a lot of cheap dice. You're going to see holocrons, you're going to see the probably Dark Council, not necessarily Chance Cube, not necessarily Crystal Ball, but you could put those in there too as just cheap dice. I mean, you might not. Force Speed is very likely to be seen in there as a free die and a great enabler for the Seventh Sister. Like if you can get Force Speed, and like a Maul Saber on Seventh Sister to be able to basically swing in for max damage that's you're able to swing out with your Force Speeds, it's just scary. I mean, and it's just the power of Maul Saber is everywhere. Blue hero or blue villain there, and between that, like Tarkin himself has a ton of focus sides, a ton of focus potential. He's 2 focus side and a 1 focus side, and then the 2 discard side on Tarkin is also like extremely relevant. It's what makes it a really tough match actually for vehicles, because if you can pop off 2 or 4 discards with Tarkin on like the first or second round, just destroying the vehicle deck's ability to ramp, you're just going to win the game, and that works well versus several other decks too. What was that?
Not to completely interrupt your train of thought, but as a tip to anybody playing Tarkin Sister, is against vehicles, you really want to hold on to that 2 discard. You don't want to pop it right away because they're going to be building their turnaround rally aid. So you want to pop that 2 discard and make it really hurt.
Yeah, if discarding the last 2 cards in their hand is significantly more valuable than discarding the first like 3. That being said, if you sit there and leave a discard out, I wouldn't be surprised if the die gets removed from your opponent playing vehicles, because they just can't afford that to be sitting there, which would allow you to get more damage in with your damage size on Seventh Sister. So that's not a bad trade-off.
But if somebody removes a 2 discard side, isn't that really just turning it into 1 discard and 1 disrupt? I think that's fair.
No, I mean, it's not bad for you as a target player. It's still, if your dice are ever actually rolling the discard as the target player, it's still very nice.
Never sorry to see that 2 discard side. And I'll let you continue. I'm sorry.
I've also been seeing more of people putting like ancient sabers in there, Vibraknives, really. So Vibraknife, like you have Vibraknife and Maul Saber combined with Seventh Sister, you can hit for 8 unblockable, and with the focuses and stuff like all in, that's really not out of the question to be able to, like, round 2, round 1 you get some resources, you get Maul Saber out, round 2 you throw out Vibraknife and Force Speed out there, you're able to focus into 8 unblockable damage is a real possibility. You might have to be sitting across from that deck on top of Tarkin's 4 indirect damage. That's really scary. Some decks are running no holocron powers in it, kind of just either running a holocron as a decoy to make as a removal bait, or just as a 0 cost upgrade for the die for Tarkin's ability.
I really do like the decks that use holocron almost purely as removal bait. That really just speaks to me, because I think it's hilarious, and it's you can't afford not to remove it if you can remove it. So it's just one more way of removing an option from your opponent, and I really like that.
Yes, it's certainly an interesting thing. Obviously, if you're playing in the top cut where they can see your deck list, it's not going to necessarily work that way, but it's still a free die, which is the whole point of it. And even if you're not running if you're not running if you are running the holocron abilities, you basically use that as your, I'm going to put this on Tarkin, and this is his basically insurance policy. So like when Seventh Sister inevitably dies, you're going to actually have an answer for Tarkin. But when Seventh Sister actually starts getting loaded up with big weapons, that's when it really is scary, and she has to die. That being said, I don't think you play ID9s in that deck anymore. Like, I know we tried it at the beginning and stuff, but I just don't know that it's good enough. And when you have stuff like Maul's Saber and stuff like Vibroknife and Ancient, like you kind of just want to really shore up on your melee sides on her. You don't need the focus from the ID9s. You have that from Tarkin himself. It just feels wasted.
One big die and multiple free or exceedingly cheap dice. I agree 100%.
So, yeah, I've not seen the deck take much in terms of regionals in the last few weeks. I'm sure there have been a few in the top 8 here and there, but it's not the most common thing, but it's definitely out there. It definitely does well against some of the meta decks.
Well, I think its big strength is against decks like Sabine or Obi-Wan, where no matter where you throw that indirect damage coming from Tarkin's power action, it's really, really harmful to your game plan. I think vehicles and one-turn kill are its worst matchups by far. It's very capable, very, very capable of beating Mill, however, because it doesn't care what it rolls, and it's going to get maximum dice out, and it's going to get a guaranteed damage every turn. So I think in a very Mill-heavy meta, it's a great call to get into the top 8 and to fight your way through.
I've had like every game I played with newer versions of like new or medium since I stopped playing the deck. And like any versions of that, like lately of Tarkin Seventh Sister with vehicles for me have not been easy matches. They have been stuff that easily could have swung the other way, or like we're within a couple points of health behind, where you don't kill, and it really comes down to if you can't kill Seventh Sister end of round 2 or before she actually can like swing in again on round 3, you probably will lose with vehicles even though you have some good removal.
I'd agree with that assessment.
One day I was walking and I found this big log. Then I rolled the log over. Underneath was a tiny little stick. And I was like, that log had a child.
All right, well, that was a really meaty episode. And once again, just to remind everyone, this is just a baseline. These are pieces of information that you can use to improve your game plan, to improve your play, and to, tighten up your deck if you need some help with, any of your stratagems, or, you're looking to slot in a couple of cards. Some of the big ones we're talking about are Vandalize, your Force Rens, your removal such as Easy Pickings, Garbage Chute, things like that. Those are extremely impactful cards that you're going to see play. And if you're not running them, I would say try testing them out and just see how impactful they are in any game state. So thank you so much for joining us. And with Hexen and Agent of Zion, you guys are from out of town. So where can people find you?
I don't do social media, so you can find me on Discord at Agent of Zion. If you happen to know my real name, feel free to hit my wife up on Facebook, and the message will get to me.
Is it Rumpelstiltskin?
That's exactly
That's your wife's name?
Well, look, man, we're not going to name shame here, all right? She's a lovely, lovely woman, and just because she has an unfortunate name of Rumpelstiltskin doesn't give you the right to make fun of her.
She is such a sweetheart, though.
Well, okay.
You two are
Clearly turning into an episode of the Galactic Ascendant.
It started that way, it's ending that way.
No, I love her, but she
don't say anything. Just don't say anything.
Doesn't listen to this podcast? That better be your only answer.
Right?
She doesn't listen to this podcast. She's yelling at me from the other room as we speak. I love her, though. She's great. And I don't actually have a gun to my head.
Do you have a knife in your back?
No. But one thing I will point out, and for people to keep an eye on, is the online regional announcement, which will be coming soon ish. The online Artificery TTS Regional will be occurring before Worlds. It will be open to all. It'll be a great time. We're going to have amazing prize support. We're just kind of nailing down the final details of it as we speak.
Hexen.
And as far as me, I'm not tied down to social media as much either, us Californians being enigmatic in our own metas. But you can just find me on the Knights of Ren Discord and the Artificery Discord under Hexen. And if you ever just want to hit me up, feel free to do so.
Right. And if you enjoyed listening to the shenanigans from these two and you haven't yet listened to the Galactic Senate, you absolutely need to. That is in the Knights of Ren RSS feed. That is the explicit show that we don't talk about very often, but boy, do we have a lot of fun with it. So definitely check them out. Check out Artificery. And, thanks for coming on, guys.
Look for the Galactic Senate in the next couple days. We're back. It's been busy.
It's not family friendly. It's not on a good schedule, but
most family-friendly part is probably the talk of the Oreos, in all honesty.
Even that can get a little dicey, but we're not going to get into that. So thank you for having us on the Knights of Ren, Sugi.
Yeah, it's always a food podcast with you two.
Just die.
Yeah, see, all I gotta do at Worlds is play a mill deck while eating Oreos, and it's just game over for you.
Mental work.
As long as they're pumpkin spice Oreos.
Pumpkin spice, right. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a basic,
All right.
We have to restrain ourselves here.
No, that's what we got the Utini for. Todd broke that way open. So that is the end of the show. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you to all of our Patreons for supporting us. Check out our YouTube channel. We're going to be posting a lot more video content up there. We have a new video talking about the 5 most meta events coming out of specifically Legacies. We're going to be tackling Rivals a little bit later on with some of the more impactful things coming out of that set. But we just want to cover a lot of stuff because with the regional season in full swing, we've got a lot of decks going through the meta. We've got Worlds on our plate in a few months. And we've got quite a few Galactic qualifiers coming up in between now and May. So there is just a lot of information to parse through, and we want to provide as much as humanly possible to the community so that you are fully aware of what's out there, how to combat it, and to find a deck that you love and enjoy. So thanks for listening. We will see you next time on the Knights of Ren, and may the Force be with you.
Yeah, whatever. You're sort of pitchy.
Didn't like it?
Listen, man. I'm not your friend.
Don't fall asleep. Don't fall asleep. Stop it now.